Hey friends, so I have watched the first episode of Life After Lockup, new season. Conspiracy streamed it on TikTok for us, and I'm not going to risk a copyright strike from Lifetime. So what I've done is I went through and took screenshots from each scene that I want to give some commentary on, and we'll go through them together. Let's bring up the first one. Okay, so I'm not educated on body language, but you don't have to be, in my opinion, to read some of Ken's expressions. Here's his first. He says he never thought he'd live in the state of Louisiana. I love Louisiana, especially New Orleans, and I just don't really understand what the issue is. Let's take a look. See Ken's face there? Now, our next scene. So, in this one, Ken had just said that they need to leave for the ultrasound at 1, and Gypsy immediately corrected him and said she thought they should leave at 12:45. Ken's expression really reminds me of that time that she went live at the airport after insisting that they get there hours early, and Ken was so clearly annoyed about it. Now, in this one, Ken had just said that finding out Gypsy was pregnant was a very shocking experience. And I feel like even though we've all made fun of him a lot for seeming like this was something like he didn't know how it happened, I feel like he's telling the truth here. Like he actually thought that with Gypsy getting free of prison and free of Ryan, that she would want to live a relatively happy, carefree life with him. And that's not what he got. I think even with Rod's warning, he somehow deluded himself that she wouldn't get pregnant immediately. Do y'all remember whenever Ken went live with Natasha Cooper and they were still saying that they were Butch's friends? And Gypsy said she was on birth control, and I suspect that Ken believed that. Just my opinion. Now, after that, Gypsy pops off here and says that it happened, and so she's gonna put on her big girl pants and freaking deal with it. And Ken says, "Same answer for me," and you can see her quickly roll her eyes. Now then in this next scene, Gypsy decides to just straight up put Ken on the spot in front of the camera, which she does a lot, and says, "I have no idea what we're going to do for marriage." And then like kind of waits for him to answer, and Ken pretty much refuses, and then eventually says, "Stay tuned for that." Then they're driving somewhere, and Gypsy is reading her hate comments on her phone, and Ken tells her to not even read them, just delete them. And she calls him, "Oh, Mr. Stay Up All Night Reading Comments." They have this little back and forth over who's the most bothered by social media when clearly they're both obsessed by it. Ken admits he's guilty of it too, and Gypsy lets her insecurity and jealousy hang out again by telling him that if she didn't trust him so much, she would think that behavior was shady. And Ken gives her the same look that he did whenever she brought up marriage on camera, like he's sick of this particular argument and is kind of refusing to take the bait and have the fight filmed. So I really think at this point of the episode, pretty much everyone watching is feeling bad for Ken because she's clearly always needling at him about stuff that he feels isn't valid or has already been addressed. But don't worry, y'all, Ken flips the script at the end. A Lifetime showed some creators that we'll probably all recognize, but interestingly, they didn't show their channel names. I'm not sure if these creators gave permission or not. From what I heard, Lifetime was only offering $100 for their content, so I would think that they would expect with that low of a price to have their channel names mentioned, but it might be hard to get followers off the way that this was presented. Pretty sure whenever they used Flawless Nina in the first season or the last season that I thought they showed her channel name, but they didn't show anyone's here. Then Rod, he pretty much calls out both of them by saying, "I knew Gypsy wanted to be pregnant. I could tell, and I would have hoped that both of them would have taken my advice, but they didn't." Then Mia, she shows good sense by saying that she was disappointed, although happy and worried. Ken's dad gets introduced. He's got an interesting sounding accent. A lot of people say that it sounds like the hacker. I mean, it's just a general Turkish accent, I think. I'm not well versed on accents from that area. So if anyone knows better, let me know in the comments. Pretty sure this is Gypsy's grandma. She predicts it'll be a girl. And then Mia says that she hopes they don't rush into a marriage and that if they do, she's not giving her blessing because she's not doing that again. She even goes on to say that dad did that with Dee Dee and we aren't doing that no more. So after the gender reveal party, we have Ken and Gypsy on the way to couples therapy. And Ken appears to have kind of been forced into this because he says, "I just didn't really think we needed couples therapy." And Gypsy starts going on about how she supports therapy so much instead of really directly answering his question. So the therapy session gets odd really quickly with Gypsy saying she doesn't want to corrupt Ken's positivity when she's having a bad day. And the look he gives her just says, "I've heard this before." I don't know if you can tell, but yeah. So then Gypsy gives an example. She says that if she brings up a stressful topic, that Ken will just shut down. And the therapist asks for an example. And of course, Gypsy says social media. She says Ken has a harder time with it than she does because she's more used to it. And Ken takes some offense to this. He says he totally disagrees with that statement and thinks she has a harder time with it. And when I first saw this, I thought of whenever I told Christy Blanchard on Brandy's Live, in my opinion and my observation, it seemed like it was really important to Gypsy for people who are in her life to fight for her on social media. And that social media just kept coming up as the talking point here of a source of tension, a source of importance, stress, all that stuff. And even though Gypsy's not specifically talking about Ken fighting for her on social media, it just feels like confirmation that social media is really important to her in her relationships. Ken then talked about how the way he gets to that, I don't want to talk about it anymore, place is Gypsy complains, and then he tries to offer a solution like, okay, I won't do that anymore, or whatever. And Gypsy immediately comes back with something like, well, I've heard that before, indicators that she doesn't believe him to the point where he doesn't know what to say. We really see a buildup of frustration in Ken. The therapist tries to redirect them back to communication, and Gypsy tells the story again, as she did at the beginning of the session, about the incorrect beliefs she had about the reason that Ken broke up with her years ago. And it appears like you can see Ken visibly rolling his eyes. It seems more and more clear that he's heard the same stuff over and over, and he's getting real sick of it. Then they're in Ken's apartment, and he talks about being frustrated with the cabinet space and the move in general, and says that he would have done things a lot differently if he could have, but the pregnancy expedited the move, and she wanted him there ASAP. So he took all of his savings and moved there. I definitely feel like he has regrets. So Gypsy and Ken are looking at houses and online, and Gypsy brings up that a house that they're looking at is 2,000 square feet, and Ken gets super cringy by asking if she thinks she can keep up with all that. They pull up to the house to look at it, and Ken is totally negative right off the bat and says, oh, look, there's a shed for all the tools I don't own. And we have a scene where Ken says he pretty much only drops Gypsy off and picks her up and cut off because he doesn't like her bed, which to me just really doesn't come across like a person in love. Then, interestingly, they joke around about how Gypsy likes to cuddle and Ken doesn't like the body heat and wants his space. And oh my God, this is almost exactly an Uno reverse of the same conversation in Gypsy and Ryan's first episode after she got out of prison. She was saying she didn't like to cuddle because of the body heat. And I feel like Ken has become just as off put by Gypsy as she was by Ryan. This next part is freaking wild. There's a scene in Ken's apartment, and they show that there's a framed picture of Gypsy Rose at a Harry Potter event back in the Dee Dee days in her wig and costume and everything. And hey, I ain't hating on wigs. I'm wearing one right now. But we all know that Gypsy says that this was a major source of her trauma at this time in her life. So why would she allow or want a reminder of this sitting around? Like, what's going on, y'all? Okay, the next we come to a point where there's a storm in Louisiana, and Gypsy's FaceTiming with Ken to tell him that they're under mandatory evacuation. Christy's sick on the couch, and Ken asks if they're evacuating, to which Gypsy says no. And he replies, well, if you die, don't say I didn't warn you. I'm not saying that Ken has a responsibility to take charge of Gypsy when she's not taking charge of herself, but I feel like if he was in love, he would care a bit more. What do y'all think? So yeah, Christy, she's sick on the couch and she is worrying about whether or not the lawn furniture is going to get blown away. Gypsy does not move a finger. Like, I know she's pregnant, but like, you could scoot some stuff around. This light, come on. She doesn't move a finger and ask if there's a man friend who could come and help, and keeps just scrolling on her phone. I'm sure she's reading hate comments. Now, at the end of the episode, things get really freaking eerie. It is so reminiscent of the episode where Gypsy and Ryan actually broke up. Like, kind of, we start with Ken being all, woo, it's date night, and Gypsy looking like she just sucked on a lemon here. And then even on the drive, you get the impression that they've had a fight and that Ken's trying to be upbeat and save it. Gypsy's just not really having it. She's giving these super strained expressions between any laugh and response. And it's been clear to a lot of us for a long time that Ken is a foodie, and that's going to be an issue because not only does Gypsy have tons of hangups about food, she really shows absolutely no interest in moving beyond them. Does she have chicken strips or something like that at Nobu? But the restaurant scene opens up with Ken asking the waiter what the waiter's favorite appetizer is. He makes no effort that we know of, unless it was edited out, to see what Gypsy wants. And then the waiter recommends octopus with ink risotto, and Ken orders for both of them, just zero attention to what Gypsy might want. She's clearly not happy about it. And Gypsy then tells him that octopus is the one creature besides spiders that she's totally freaked out by and doesn't want to eat. And, clearly it's not the one since she just named spiders. And honestly, it feels like Gypsy's always having these instances of, this is the one thing. This is my one thing. I needed this one thing. And it's never one thing, it's a million things. But anyway, Ken replies to that, well, you're going to eat it tonight. He says, I'm not going to hear anything about your fears. You're just going to try it. Now, that's some tough love that people like Gypsy obviously need sometimes. But at the same time, she is pregnant. And he did just order, octopus and ink for a pregnant woman that he knows like chicken strips and royal mashed potatoes. Ugh. It just seems like it's really obvious that Ken's getting really sick of hearing about her hangups when it comes to every single thing they do, and he just wants to have the dinner he wants. I don't understand why he didn't order something in addition that he knew he'd like, or give her a chance to like have some food in her stomach, because she's not going to eat octopus. When she inevitably refuses it, at the end of the day, she is pregnant. Like she's going to be hungry, and no one really wants to be trying new things when they're pregnant, especially not things that you're in any way queasy about. So Ken then he tries to make things upbeat again by saying, "Oh, 7 years ago today we met, and I couldn't imagine that we'd be sitting here today," or something like that. And Gypsy brings it back down by saying she didn't think their relationship where they were then would have survived the rest of her sentence because he had a real life and a lot going on, and for her time stopped and everything stayed the same. And Ken looked depressed, like he'd heard this so many times, and said he was sure that there are things that both of them wish they could change, but it just seemed like Gypsy was really set on being a victim in a celebratory night, much like that one dinner with Ryan. And Ken was trying way too hard to keep the mood positive. So the octopus and ink risotto came out. Personally, I love octopus. I like calamari. I like it different ways. It looked amazing. But when Ken cut a piece and handed it to her, she did like this fake little scream, and it seemed like it embarrassed Ken. And he was like, "It's not that scary." So Gypsy, she like chewed it a little and then started to spit it out. Ken tells her to just swallow it and don't be ridiculous. I actually started to feel a little sorry for Gypsy. I don't like to admitting that, but I started to feel a little sorry for her at this point because she is pregnant. And even though she's always acted a fool, she was acting a fool at the beginning of this dinner. Ken knows damn well she's not going to eat any of this, and she is pregnant, and he's always hounding at her to eat protein and drink water. I think he would want to make sure there's food in her stomach. So Ken, like he really rubbed it in by telling her he thought it was amazing and pointing out the suction cups on a tentacle before putting it in his mouth and popping it and chewing it. And like I said, I like octopus too, but if a pregnant woman was in front of me who hated octopus and I cared anything about her, I wouldn't be egging her on to be nauseated by it. So the waiter then brought out the other thing Ken ordered, which was a blue crab salad, which also looked absolutely amazing. It was like lump blue crab with watermelon and tomato chunks. And Gypsy looked at it again like she was going to puke. And I don't think she ever really eats raw fruits or vegetables that I've ever seen. But Ken, he did not let up. Gypsy kind of picks at the salad and then sets it aside. She does not even try a bite. Like she puts it on her fork a couple of times and looks at it. And it's just like, no. Now, I think this is a point where a lot of us were shocked, even us, Gypsy haters, as she would say. I don't consider myself a Gypsy hater. I don't actually hate her. I just think that she should not be continuing the same pattern that Dee Dee taught her for a living after she gets out of prison for murdering Dee Dee for teaching her that pattern. Anyway, but yeah, I feel like even as Gypsy haters, some of us felt a little bit sorry for Gypsy in the moment here. You have to stop and remember who we're feeling sorry for. But yeah, Ken straight up told her after that, he said, "You are so disappointing." Y'all, it was pretty blunt, but the feeling had been clear in his facial expressions for quite a while. Like that's not new information for anyone observing Ken. And he's just obviously super disappointed in the situation he finds himself in. So the waiter knew that Gypsy didn't like the octopus and came back and asked if this round was more to her liking. And she lied, trying to smooth it over and be polite, and said yes. And Ken called her out. He said she's lying. She didn't even try a bite. And then to rub more salt in the wound, the waiter offers to bring her like a regular salad with like a creamy dressing or something. And she says no, she's fine. And Ken says she's just afraid. Gypsy tells the waiter it's because she's pregnant. And the waiter is trying to be like all super cool. And he's like, "Oh, you're pregnant. You're allowed to not like anything you want. No one will put you down." And Ken says, "Well, I just wanted to shame her a little bit. That's all." It was awkward, y'all. Very awkward. The waiter actually literally responds that public shaming rarely works, and Gypsy looked elated to have some support. So awkward. So Gypsy then asks to go to the bathroom, and this is where, the sympathy for her. Then Gypsy comes back to the table, all awkward and upset, and Ken tries to move the convo, asks if she's excited about the house. It's really awkward, and Ken asks if she loves it and is excited, and Gypsy's awkwardly nodding and saying, uh-huh. And then Ken says, do you think you'll be able to make that house a home? And she says, I think it'll be a good place for you and the baby. To which he says, what about you? And Gypsy replies, I can't live there. And he was like, "Yeah, but you can make it a home, you can stay there." And this is just so reminiscent of her last dinner with Ryan, where she just kept downing every single thing that he said. Ken just kind of says, "Okay," and gives up after that. Gypsy looks at the camera like she's sick again or sucking on a lemon and sighs. Then we get a sad Ryan scene where Ryan's talking about how the neon sign burned her name in the wall, and he don't know if he wants to paint over it or not. Oh my god, like, what a dumpster fire, y'all. What do you think is gonna happen in the next one? And based on this, I believe that Nina got good information whenever she said they broke up. I just think they got back together. What do y'all think?